All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kofi. I work as a data science consultant helping teams like Arbitrum and Alchemy and Safe and Scroll solve different data problems that they have. I also work on my own open source, dashboards and data sets, one of them being BundleBear, which tracks smart account adoption. And that's a data set that's used by a lot of teams like the Ethereum Foundation, Coinbase, and so on. Like I'm sure some of you are still recovering from the 12-hour flight it took to get here. I don't know if I'm hiding it very well, but I definitely am. So can start with a bit of like engagement, some hot takes to kind of get everybody's energy up. First question, show of hands, how many of you use a MetaMask wallet? So you got it in your browser. Got a lot of, pretty much everyone. We've got a lot of crypto natives here. Nice. So the type of wallet that you use with MetaMask, Ethereum, Rainbow, whatever you've got, the technical term is an EOA, an externally owned account. So that's the default type of wallet in Ethereum where each account is secured by a single private key. Millions of people use them today. The growth over the past decade has been astronomical, all of that good stuff. My first hot take of the day is that those are dead. EOAs are dinosaurs, and the asteroid is coming, they're going extinct, and within this decade, almost nobody is going to use them. Instead, we will all use smart contract wallets, which are also known as smart accounts, because frankly, they're just better in every way imaginable. So I'm going to run through a scenario, comparing the two so we can see what the difference is. You can tell me if this story feels familiar to you at all, like maybe it's 2021, people just made $69 million selling every days, and Jay-Z just made a CryptoPunk his profile picture, if you remember when that happened. And so you're sold, you want in, you don't want to be left behind. So maybe you visit an NFT site and pick a random free NFT to try and mint it. The site says that you need MetaMask to mint this NFT. You don't know what that is, so you Google it, watch some mildly confusing YouTube videos about wallets and like what is a blockchain and gas and all of that stuff. You don't really understand what half of it means, but you figure out how to install MetaMask and you create a wallet. MetaMask shows you a seed phrase. Now, you might be feeling a bit anxious about this step because the YouTubers told you that if you lose this phrase, all your money is gone and nobody will be able to help you. So, you double check and you triple check and you try and find a safe place to put it. And maybe it looks like everything went fine, but you're a little bit worried that you did something wrong. And you probably did do something wrong because you're not a security expert. Probably did some stupid shit like saving a picture of your seed phrase in Google Drive. I mean, I think I saw on Twitter there was somebody who lost like millions of dollars worth of ETH and NFTs just a few weeks ago because they had a picture of their seed phrase in Google Drive. This kind of stuff happens all the time, but hopefully you did it right. The YouTubers also told you that you needed gas money. You don't fully understand that part, but the fear of missing out is strong, so you push forward. You spend about 30 minutes signing up for Coinbase, getting all the KYC stuff done. You buy ETH, you send it to your wallet, and you're waiting for the money to hit. I don't know if you remember that first time that you tried to like load up gas money, the anxiety of like, oh, it hasn't come. Is it a scam? Did I put in the address wrong? Starting to feel a bit anxious, but finally the transfer hits, boom, you're relieved, you go back to the NFT site, you click mint, wallet pops up, how much is gas gonna cost? Why am I paying even though this is a free NFT? It's weird, but you do it anyway, you hit confirm, and finally, your first NFT pops up in your wallet. And you made it through. And I feel like a lot of people in this room probably did make it through to this step, but most folk drop off in one of the previous 8 parts of the process because it's just a troublesome process, And at this point, with all the investment you put in, you're thinking that if this particular NFT doesn't blow up, you might never use another crypto app because it's just quite hard to do. It's not the best onboarding experience. But what if things could be better, is what we're here to talk about today. Like, what would that look like? So let's run through the scenario again, this time with a smart account. It's 2021, NFTs are the hot thing, Beeple $69 million, blah, blah, blah. So you're sold, you want in, you don't want to get left behind. You go to that NFT website, pick a random free NFT, try to mint it. In this scenario, you're prompted to create an account. So you can use smart accounts through a dedicated wallet app like a MetaMask or something, but what we're seeing is in a lot of cases, usually apps have the account functionality built in. And that's fine. Creating an account when you visit a website is an experience that everybody is familiar with. It feels normal. you're asked to secure your account with a passkey. You might not know what that is, but they make it pretty simple, easy for you to do. You sign in with your fingerprint on your phone, or face scan, or screen lock on your device, whatever it is that you're familiar with, just normal stuff, and your account's been made. You click mint, the transaction pops up. You don't need to know what a gas fee is, because in this case, either the chain that you're on or the app that you're using is paying the gas on your behalf. You confirm, and that was it. You've got your first NFT. You're feeling good. That was easy. You're a crypto genius. And if you go through an onboarding process like this, you're more likely to try more apps, because that was fine. Like, it wasn't a traumatizing experience. It wasn't that bad. So how is that second scenario possible? How do we get to that second step? 4 instead of, well, actually 3 instead of 8. How do we cut that process down? That second onboarding flow is possible because smart accounts are contracts that can be customized for ease of use. You can program a smart account to allow gas sponsorship, where the app pays for the gas on the behalf of the user. You can program it to accept authentication methods that are easier and harder to mess up than the seed phrase, like using passkeys, we saw in that example. You can program it to bundle a multiple-step process into a single transaction. Basically, you can add whatever logic you like. But the user doesn't need to know about all of that work that was done in the background. All they see is that they're getting a Web 2 level of convenience, but then the Web 3 use case of being able to hold their own keys, which is a huge deal, right? Because centralized exchanges are the biggest apps in our industry because they have the Web 2 experience as compared to on-chain products, but the exchange holds the keys, so as the saying goes, the coins aren't yours, and smart accounts make it possible to build apps that give you both that Web 2 ease of use and the self-custody. I'm not the only one who thinks that smart accounts are a big deal. In a recent blog post, our patron Saint Vitalik said that smart account adoption is one of the 3 most important transitions coming to the Ethereum ecosystem. Vitalik actually co-authored a new standard for smart accounts called ERC-4337. A lot of you will be aware that most token contracts in the Ethereum ecosystem are ERC-20s, and all NFTs are either ERC-721 or 1155. Now there's 4337 for these contracts that act as wallets. So at this point, some of you might be thinking, if you've been around for a little bit longer, that the smart account idea is old. So why would it take off now when we've already had these for so long? I mean, there are people in the crowd here who work for Safe, and Safe launched the first popular smart account product back in 2018, focusing on the multi-sig functionality at first, and now has a lot more functionality. We've had Argent, we've had Ethereum. When Starknet launched, it had all of the accounts being smart accounts by default, no EOAs. And after all of the time, at this point, EOA wallets are still king. They still have most of the activity. They still have the majority of the usage. So what's changed? The biggest problem with smart account adoption, why it couldn't work before, is that it costs a lot of money to deploy smart accounts because they're contracts. At peak 2021 bull market, it could cost you like $100 on some days to deploy a Safe on mainnet, which was way too expensive for mass adoption. Most users won't pay that much just to make a wallet to get started, and EOA is always free. And any app fronting the cost of deploying all of those contracts is probably going to go bankrupt at some point. But now we have a lot of cheap L2s, where it only costs a few cents to deploy a smart account. Deploying that Safe costs you like a fraction of a dollar now, and that's a lot more doable. The second biggest problem before was that nobody was working together. We had dozens of teams working on different solutions, not really benefiting from each other's work. But now that 4337 has launched, we're seeing like all of the major teams, whether that's Safe or Coinbase Wallet or MetaMask, and a bunch of new wallet startups like Biconomy and Pimlico and ZeroDev, all either working towards adopting the standard or already working with the standard. And so you're concentrating all those fragmented resources on making one system really, really good for everybody. And I mean, if you look at the numbers, ERC 4337 is blowing up. It looks great. There's like 18 million 4337 accounts that have been made, and it looks like millions of them are being used every month. Every chart is a rocket ship. But maybe this is the point to sort of jump into my next question of the day, which is raise your hand if you've ever knowingly used a 4337 wallet, if you've ever knowingly used one. I feel like that's a lot more hands than I was expecting. But usually, when I ask this question in most rooms, the answer is absolutely nobody, because it just hasn't really kicked off that hard in our community, which is weird, right? I mean, if everything I said was true, if there's millions of these accounts that have been made and that are being used every month, if there's rocket ship growth, then why haven't that many people used one? I mean, even the hands that came up, I thought it was a lot. That was maybe 30% of the room compared to 100% we got in the first question. If the numbers are so good, why is that the case? That must be the case because these numbers aren't the full story, right? Like some percentage of the usage in this chart must be bullshit. So I'm going to do what I always do when I'm trying to separate real usage from bullshit. I'll check for three things. I'll check for spam, bots, and Sybil attackers. We'll start with spam. When I talk about spam, really what I'm referring to are wallets that have insignificant low-value usage that pump the metric just because they're present, right? So we can maybe start off using some basic rules to filter those out. Maybe I'll just start by checking which accounts have only made one action or one transaction in their entire lifetime. And if I do that, you can see that checking for spam puts a huge dent in that chart. About 78% of the monthly active accounts, 437 accounts, would be classed as spam if I use this filter of oh, it's only been used once and nobody ever used it again. Next I'll check for bots that are running MEV or a high-frequency trading strategy. So these types of wallets will make way more actions than any normal user would make because they're automated. Maybe a filter I'd use would be checking for accounts that transact more than 500 times a month, because that averages out to transacting most hours of the day every day, and no normal human being would be doing that. This filter doesn't have as big of an effect on the active accounts chart as the spam one. It's not even really visible on the chart. They only take up maybe 1% of accounts. But if we look at a different chart of the 437 transactions that these wallets are making, so the actions that they're doing, the high-frequency bots make up about 20% of monthly actions. So they have a big impact on some metrics and not on other metrics. Finally, I look at possible Sybil attacks, meaning clusters of accounts that are owned by the same person or the same company, because you can have a lot of active accounts, but the number is misleading if only 3 people own 30% of them. To check this, I might start by looking for accounts that are executing the exact same sequence of events at the exact same time intervals, or accounts that have funded each other, or any other such thing. I didn't actually get around to making a chart for this, but hopefully you get the idea of how I might go about filtering for that as well. But that's how I start the process of finding the truth about ERC 4337 usage, or also applying this to other problems as well. I check for these 3 sources of bullshit. I'd start with very simple filters, like the ones that we were discussing, just using common sense to come up with them, and then expand into more complex filters and techniques, if that's needed, or if I require a deeper insight. So this chart shows accounts that I'll call normal accounts. They're more regular activity. They're not obviously spam or obviously bots based on the filters that we talked about. So this is a more realistic picture of how much 4337 is being used. I mean, it's still flawed, of course, because the filters we were talking about are very simple. You can cut down these numbers a lot more. But it's a better view of reality than what we had before. Instead of millions of accounts being used every month, it's more like hundreds of thousands. And there was a good spike in Q3 2024, but the numbers are still relatively tiny compared to the earlier chart, and they're super tiny if we compare them to EOAs. And obviously, 437, if we look at this chart, it has a long way to go as a standard when it comes to attracting strong product builders who would thereby attract more users. But this is cool. At least we've cleared out some of the nonsense. But the analysis still feels a bit incomplete because we know there's a lot of spam accounts taking up, as I said, more than 70% of the active accounts. But we don't know why all of these spam accounts are being created or how their on-chain activity is different from the normal accounts that we see here. So to get those answers, I'll go through a simple 2-step process. First, I'll check what contracts are these accounts interacting with when they transact, and then I will spend the rest of my working hours trying to map these contracts to the protocols and the apps and the projects that own them so we can get the full story. And that second step takes the vast majority of the time. That's like, it's a never-ending process, just weeks and months and years of work. But when it comes to labeling, you're lucky. You have some existing resources to fall on now, much better than when I first started. I mean, Dune has great contract label data nowadays. Frederick talked about that in his talk at the start of the day. You can check stuff like Etherscan, you can check Arkham for labels. But if you're doing something that's like really niche and new, you'll probably have to do some manual searching yourself, like searching up the contract addresses on GitHub and stuff like that to see if they show up in somebody's repo or trying to find them in product documentation and so on. So first, I'll apply that two-step process to the accounts that we said were spam, right? So the ones that only made one action in their entire lifetime. Looking at the contracts that were being interacted with and checking who those contracts belong to, thanks. Over the past few months, we see that these were the top apps used by spam accounts. So we see that the majority of this one-off usage was driven by an NFT called Piggybox. Might be hard to see on the chart, but it's an NFT called Piggybox. Some Googling tells me that Piggybox is a reward that you get when you do this sign-up quest for a community called Earnum. So you join their Telegram and their Discord, follow them on Twitter, and they will give you some random amount of tokens, and then they'll give you this NFT, which explains why there's so much spam, right? Because people obviously do the sign-up quest to see if they can win some tokens, and then they probably never use the Piggybox NFT again or use the Earnum community again. There are many, many scenarios like this. You see many charts that look amazing, you dive deeper, and there's a Piggybox hiding behind that's causing all of that activity. There are probably also folk who are Sybil attacking this quest by making a bunch of Telegram accounts and Twitter accounts to do it. So basically, we can see where the problem is coming from. In comparison, these were the top apps used by what I call the more normal accounts or the more human-looking accounts. In contrast to the last chart, we see that there are a few different apps that share the usage, which already sounds a bit healthier. The top ones right now are Blocklords, which is an RPG game on Base. There's some Ducklings NFT trading card game, and then there's Open Social, which is like a social app platform, kind of like Farcaster or something like that. And looking at this chart, it makes sense, right? Games and social apps are things that you need to use more than once if you want to get the value out of them. I mean, even if you're just farming an airdrop, you need to use a game or a social app continuously to be eligible for the airdrop. Whereas with the sign-up quest that we saw before, you only had to do one action to get the value. So now we have a better understanding of why the spam filter cuts out a lot of the ERC for 327 usage. There are some apps that reward one-off activity, and those apps are being farmed to death by spammers, and there are apps that encourage repeat usage, like games, and those are driving what we would consider to be more normal or more valuable usage as analysts. Yeah. The lesson here is, when you're analyzing any crypto product, whether that has to do with smart accounts or not, you should always check for bullshit. You should use, starting with common sense filters, simple common sense filters like the ones we talked about, that will show you maybe 80% of the truth, and then progress to more advanced filters and techniques if you need that last 20% of accuracy. Working as an analyst, there's lots of times, you'll be asked to calculate metrics like active wallets because the marketing team needs something for Twitter content. And that's, that's perfectly fine. A job is a job. We all need to make money, but you need to understand that when you're asked to do simple metrics like that without interrogating or filtering, you're helping to sell dreams to copium addicts. And again, like I said, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you. But all I'm saying is that don't get high on your own supply. You can't, as the analyst, think that that's the entire truth. You need to be the one on the team who understands that there's more filtering that needs to be done there and more interrogation that needs to be done. When you see a chart that really excites you or really depresses you, in the words of our bald patron Brian Armstrong, you need to remember that the reality is never as good as it seems, and it's never as bad as it seems. So thanks, happy to, thank you. happy to take any questions about smart accounts or about, if you just want to talk about what it's like working as a data consultant in general, I can also talk about stuff like that. If you're interested in analyzing smart account or ERC 4337 data, Andrew Hong, who used to be the data headmaster here at Dune, made a really great educational resource that I've linked over there that you can check out. And yeah, happy to jump into those questions.
Hey, Kofi. Thanks so much for the presentation. That was brilliant. You mentioned you're using labels to enrich the data to figure out what is happening with these transactions. What are the typical data sources for labels you're using in this as part of this process?
Yeah, so usually I would start by, checking, is this something that already exists in Dune labels? Like maybe somebody decoded the contract, and so Dune already knows that it's owned by Uniswap, so I would check that first. Usually you might not be so lucky, so then you would just go to GitHub and search the contract and see if it shows up in the GitHub repo for Project X. Then you know it belongs to Project X. Or, you might take a look at the actual transactions on Etherscan and see that, okay, I don't know what this is, but it seems like in all the transactions, some token called P token is being traded, so it probably has something to do like that. I might go to that project's website, check their documentation to see if it belongs to them, and yeah, just sort of go down the list of sources like that.
Hi, Kofi. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering what can we do, like as data experts, to track like meaningful metrics like the ones that you mentioned. Obviously, I'm on board with you with the labels, also with the filters. Still, we were chatting, for example, about Piggybox in July already.
Oh yeah.
And wondering what the hell is this? And we had like zero information about it, and it took us almost like 2 months to realize, is this a platform that rewards users? Are we failing a little bit as data experts to really like assess a little bit deeper what our products are doing? Like even like what is the retention? What is the real value behind a particular labs?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question, right? It's the question that like we spend most of the time thinking about. I think that I wouldn't say that we're failing because I think that we're getting better. Back in 2021, you posted some chart on Twitter, active addresses, and most people would be like, oh, that's fine, and you wouldn't think that much about it. Or at least now, with the presentation Frederick gave in the morning or the C-Launch presentation right before this, you're starting to see a trend of more and more people at least asking the question of, where's the number actually coming from and what is it actually doing? So I think that generally as a community, the knowledge and the sentiment is getting better around that. I think that when it comes to what we can do, there is probably some ways to go when it comes to the standardization of some of these methods. Like with labels, Dune's doing a good job of aggregating more labels. There's a lot of other teams working on labels, but everybody spends so much time trying to figure out which contracts belong to who that there's obviously a lot more progress that we can make in collaborating and actually sharing labels to make sure that everybody can get an image of what's going on. And when it comes to the filters as well, a lot more progress that can be made in like sharing what rules we're using for different filters and arguing about them so that we can actually arrive on things that actually make sense and are actually any good. But yeah, we're all in this room at this conference to talk to each other, so that's what we should do. We should talk to each other and figure out how we can standardize more of these solutions, right?
Hey, Kofi, this is kind of a random question, but do you have any insight into like the popular and or emergent authentication methods for smart accounts?
Yeah, so at the moment, the most popular, new authentication method that we're seeing different teams using is the passkeys, where basically instead of you storing your private key, which is probably for the best because we're pretty bad at storing private keys as humans. People do a lot of weird stuff like, oh, you write it down on a piece of paper, you lose the paper gets wet or whatever it is. The private key is stored in the secure enclave of a device that you own. So maybe your private key is stored in the secure enclave of your iPhone. Apple as a company is much better at storing secrets than probably you are as an individual citizen. And that key is not shared with any like third party or whatever. It's stored on your device, and you just have to sign with the authentication method that is unique to the device that you have. So fingerprint on your phone, face scan, whatever it is. And I like that because really what you want is something that's easier for people to use, harder for people to mess up than seed phrases, and passkeys are good, but we've also seen people trying out things with social recovery, where like, oh, you lose your keys, but some friend has a permission to help you recover them, or like you can use different like configurations of a proof of an email being sent and other things being tried out. But the thing that's good is that we can try out things. We can actually try out things that aren't seed phrases with smart accounts. We have the option to explore more options, which we don't have with EOAs. And I'm sure that with all of the smart people working on it, we will find things that are better than seed phrases. Yeah, it's like there will be better ways to do things.
Awesome. I actually want to ask a question.
Yep, go ahead.
So I remember looking, like you showed in your chart also, the adoption of smart accounts is actually quite low as a percentage of EOAs.
Yeah.
Do you envision the existing people in this room with all the EOAs will convert to smart accounts because it's just so much superior and we just have to convert? Or do you think it's like these smart accounts are coming from new users entering the crypto space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my guess is that the transition will come from people using new apps that are really popular. Because people aren't going to say, hey, I'm going to stop using MetaMask, let me transition to like finding some smart account app and use that instead. What will happen is that the next app that takes over the world, so the next OpenSea, the next Polymarket or whatever it is much more likely to use smart accounts, whether that's built on or not, than to use EOAs. And so everybody who gets onboarded onto that app is going to be using a smart account, and people will transition over time driven by usage rather than driven by I'm making a conscious decision to like change my old behavior to a new behavior. And there's a lot of effort being done around making the developer process easier so that new apps can use smart accounts. The Coinbase wallet team has done a ton over the past few months, making their account kit super easy to use so that new apps can have that experience. And new apps want to have that experience. New apps want it to be easy for people to sign up and just use their fingerprint and open it, instead of trying to like make them jump through a bunch of hoops of, sign up for this and then get Coinbase and then buy ETH or Solana and then send it and do that, and then people have dropped off. Like, apps want to have users, and so they are way more incentivized to adopt this than average people, and I think that's where the growth is going to come from.
Thank you. Yes, we have one more question here.
Cool.
This is a very good topic. Everybody wants to ask Kofi questions.
As a data expert and guru and someone who even works as a VC, Kofi, I'm fully on you that I hate EOAs and we should get rid of them. But what is your prediction? What will happen with 7702? And now that potentially EOAs in the future could behave as smart accounts.
Yeah, so I mean that is bringing in another parallel. What's the word? Future. I mean, right now, as he's talking about, there's work on a new standard that will actually allow your EOA to be upgraded into a smart account. So it'd be like you're making a transaction, and within the moment of that transaction, a contract will be deployed, and you'd be using that as your account. So I think that that's great that there's stuff like that being worked on, because it will make that transition easier. Instead of having to be like, oh, I use this new app that has smart accounts, now I'm using smart accounts, you will, at some point, hopefully, next year, be actually able to convert your existing MetaMask wallet that you have into a smart account and just benefit from all of these things, like not having to pay gas fees anymore and not having to do approve and then swap into separate transactions when you're trying to swap on Uniswap. And all of these amazing things that you can benefit from will hopefully be one click away. So that's one path that I think is really awesome to look forward to when it comes to smart account adoption.
think we have quite the time for one more question. Okay, maybe two more, then we'll go for a break.
Yeah, part of my question was already answered about the new standard. I wanted to ask you if, what do you think about the current standard for 337? Will it survive the new standards? Because even though the account abstraction will be moved to the native layer, EOS will be substituted with a new account abstraction. They are still not going to have the bundling of transactions. I mean, the gas that you pay for a transaction will be higher.
Are you talking about in the case where somebody's using an EOA that's upgraded with, I've forgotten the name of the new standard. Is it 3077? There's too many numbers to remember. I have a hard time memorizing all of the stuff.
It's something like 7 and 3 other numbers.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about though, but the new upgrade standard, I agree there is higher cost involved because of the fact that there is a contract that's being deployed. I think that I am not so sure about the implementation of 3077, if I'm even getting the number right, but I would imagine that there would still be a way for the app to sponsor the cost of deploying the contract, which is what makes it more expensive. But hopefully somebody smarter than me has figured out the specifics around that. In terms of bundling, because I think in 3077, the contract is deployed at the moment of transaction, it wouldn't really help if you are doing multiple transactions to bundle them up. But probably what would happen is that the one transaction that you're doing in that action will have many actions tied into it. So instead of you do 3077 transactions and then another one, in your one, you'd have multiple actions tied into that one transaction.
It is,
but again,
yeah,
I am not totally up to date on the implementation of it. I'm sure that somebody way more up to date could give a better answer than that.
Awesome. And you
Thank
can
you.
always find Kofi after this talk.
Yeah, you can find me after the talk, and on the 15th at the account abstraction booth at DevCon, I'll do an AMA there in the morning. So if you want to chat more about like specifics of the implementation of smart accounts and stuff, I'll also be there.
Yeah, maybe there's going to be a queue of people.